Hi. So today I want to talk to you about networking. This is a topic that's often discussed and people often are told how important it is. I want to start off by giving you a sense of why it's important, perhaps a different way to think about it than usually arises. But then I want to get into some detail as to how you go about networking, what this actually means in practice for you, how you turn it into something with greater impact for you and greater impact for those around you. Usually, when people talk about networking, they start by making the assumption that they're talking about something that helps you grow your career. In other words, connecting with people who will help you gain promotion, help you become more successful in your career. That's often the starting point of a conversation. We suggest, though, there's a better place to think about networking to start with. And this is the idea of collaborative leadership, or just leadership. The thing is that we live in a world where, for a long time, people have promoted the idea that the leader is the person at the very top of an organization, the very senior person. And this is confusing us. It's moving us away from the principles of leadership, which is quite different. Leadership, we would argue, is successful when it's a collaborative endeavor. We're all involved in it. In other words, no leader leads alone. In fact, it needs everyone at all levels, however junior or inexperienced they are, to be working in an appropriate collaborative way for the organization to be successful as a whole. And networking, having a broad or detailed or in-depth series of relationships with people, is a powerful part of that collaborative leadership. It's an enabler. So it will help both you and your leadership and your development. Much more importantly, it'll help the organizations that you work with and for. So always be thinking that this networking is designed to help with leadership, your leadership, and those around you. Now, that's not to say there aren't different lenses that can be usefully used when looking at your network. So the first one, as I suggested, is the lens of career. So when using the lens of a career and career growth, the idea is that you might draw out your network. Who are the people that you know, that you talk to, that you know well, that you know less well? What roles could they have today and in the future in helping you gain promotion, build your career in your organization or your sector? That's a useful way to look at your existing network. Another way to think about it, though, is the leadership of the organization. If you were in charge of your division or in charge of the whole organization, what sort of relationships would you want your people to have? Do you have them? They might, for example, be relationships with competitors, relationships with other people in the industry or sector. If you're in the world of finance, actually, it might be people in IT, because IT and technology is so fundamental to the success of finance. It might even be more broader in the sense of people who teach, develop, trainers. There might be people there that are helpful that would actually enable your organization to be more successful. Another way of looking at your relationships and your network is just in terms of delivering your daily tasks. So whatever your job is today or turning into, what would be helpful to be more successful? Do you need certain types of knowledge? Do you need to know how to do things, write reports, for example, or make sales calls? Who might be able to guide you or give you advice on those? So there are quite a few different ways of looking at your networks. And that's a useful thing to try out. Literally draw it out on a piece of paper and ask yourself, where might the gaps be? What could I do differently? So now let's turn to this question of how do you go about building this network? How do you go about building relationships? Well, for us, the starting piece of advice is to make this enjoyable, to find a fun way of doing it. It's really important because this is a part of your life. So if you don't like doing it, try to find a way that you can like, that you can enjoy doing. An obvious example is many people find it very difficult going into a large room with dozens of people they don't know. And they think, that's networking. I don't like that. So try and do that in a different way. Either don't go to those events, try to engage with people in one-to-one conversations or in small groups. Or if you're expected to go to those events, try to address them in a way that makes it feel like the thing that you do enjoy, the one-to-ones or the small groups. So for example, when you arrive, if you arrive alone, you might look for other people who are alone or have just arrived and go up to them and say, hi, I'm Phil, I've just arrived. I don't think I know anyone here. Do you? and you start a conversation. And that might sound slightly trite, but it was a massive eye-opener for me personally. I spent much of my earlier career dreading those big events. I really hated them. And then when someone taught me this step, it was a dramatic change. I was able to ignore this idea of the big event going around me and just focus in on one or two people. Another route to that, of course, is to go with someone you know who knows other people. That might be another way to address it. So think about what you enjoy. Do you enjoy having coffee with people? Do you enjoy having lunch with people? Do you enjoy going for walks? Try to use those as a way, as a tool to involve the other person when you're thinking about getting together with them. So when you're thinking about this idea of enjoyment, you also need to think about how other people might enjoy things. So if you know something about them, do they like going for coffees in small groups? Do they like going to the pub? Do they like playing football? Do they like going to the gym? Are there some clues there? Now, we're not suggesting you, trawl these people, but we are suggesting think about their preferences as well as your own where you can. That will help build it up. The next piece is to think about making sure that it's not just all about you. It's this idea of collaborative leadership. So think about how you might be able to help the other person or the people that you want to talk to, either now or in the future. And even if you don't know, be prepared always really at the end of a conversation to say, that's been really interesting. That's been really helpful. Thank you. How can I help you? Or if you can't think of how I can help you now, just please bear in mind, I'd love to help you in the future. Try and make it a relationship, building together. You simply don't know right now how you could help others in the future. In fact, that's also a sensible thing when you're building the relationships to start with. Don't get too fixated about what exactly you need from a relationship, because it might not be the right person. You might not like each other. It's perfectly possible. And you don't know where they're going to go. So this is one of the important things about building relationships with peers, people at your level or even junior, because at some time very soon, they may be much more senior to you, or they can be very influential. And that's a key thing. So building those relationships at that level is important. It's also a nice way to start if you're feeling uncomfortable about going to senior people. You can start by talking to more junior people or people who are your peers or people who joined just before you. Another way to think of this is an idea called reverse mentoring. If you don't know what it is, I suggest looking it up. But the basic principle is that we tend to think of mentoring as something that a senior experienced person does to a more junior inexperienced person. But actually, mentoring works in reverse as well. The real way to explain this is to think about if you're a 20-year-old, your interpretations, your perspective on social media, on technology will be completely different to mine in my 50s. I will be able to learn an awful lot from you because of your understanding of how things actually work today versus mine. You don't have to come about it as teaching me, but these are useful things to share that I can learn from just hearing your experiences and your ideas. It's a two-way relationship. So what might be the starters to open up conversations? Well, try to think of this again in the way that makes it easy and gradual. Don't make it too hard. Asking someone you don't know to be your mentor can be too much of an ask. They don't know you. They don't know whether they want to invest in you. So make things easier and more gradual. Ask always, in fact, think about asking for advice. That's the go-to way to start a conversation, to build a relationship with someone you don't know. That's because almost everyone enjoys giving advice. It's also because you are really building rapport. You're really building trust. Because when you ask for advice, you are demonstrating that you believe in their opinion, that you respect their opinion. So they will enjoy sharing their thoughts and their advice, provided, of course, you've asked them for advice on something genuine. So always have that as an idea. It's a great way to start the conversation. I understand you work in payments. I was thinking you might be able to give me advice about this issue that I'm involved in, this task that I'm doing. Or maybe you could give me some advice because I'm wondering whether I might go into payments in my career. So keep it at that sort of gentle level. In a similar way, if you're worried about going up to a senior person, maybe you can find a way to interact that's easier in the first instance. Maybe you can simply say, I'm going out to buy a coffee. Would you like one? When you bring back the coffee, there's an opportunity to ask a question. Or just the first time, give them the coffee. But you've now started a relationship, started a connection. And maybe next time they'll come with you and say, oh, I could do to step out and take a break and get a coffee. You could even lead them towards that slightly because you could say, excuse me, I really need a break right now, so I'm just going to go for a short walk and grab a coffee. Would you like one on the way back? They might go, oh, yeah, I could do with a break. So those are ways of trying to open up gently conversations that create opportunities to ask questions, to ask for advice. Always think about making it enjoyable for you and helpful. And if, for example, you get a knockback like, I'm sorry, I don't have time right now, then just come back. When might you have time? That's a really clever way of moving someone from they've just pushed back, I don't have time. That might have been they didn't really want to do it. They haven't thought much about it. They're just saying not now. But if you then say, when do you have time? When might you have time? You've made the implicit assumption that they're willing to give you that time. And that's very helpful. If you're going into a conversation for the first time, do have some thoughts about what questions you might be asking and what conversation topics you might be going for. Is it going to be simple, maybe about the weather, right? Or your journey into work? Is it going to be one of those sorts of things? Or do you have some specific advice that you want to ask for? Make it easy and open. That's very important. Try to avoid closed down questions. So for example, if you are thinking you'd really like to be introduced to your CEO and the person you want to talk to knows the CEO, don't make an assumption, directly ask, could you introduce me to Shirley, the CEO? They don't know you yet. They don't know whether to trust you. That's really quite a challenge. So find other ways to think about it, really open questions. So that might be, I think it would be good if I got to know Shirley and understood and learned from her. She's the CEO after all. How do you think I should go about that? You're asking for advice, open questions. Hopefully it'll lead to them saying at some point, I can introduce you. Or they would recommend what you do, a project, for example. And the last piece of advice when opening up and starting this process of building connections, building relationships, is to think that that's what you're doing. You're building rapport, you're building trust. In the longer run, in the medium term, that enables you to ask for advice, that enables you to contact someone when you need help because you've got a relationship. It also allows them to call you in the same way. When you want some knowledge, it allows you to do that. So think about how you go about building relationships. Normally, this involves some basic skills that come from the coaching on the go philosophy as part of your leadership. So for example, asking good open questions, right? Don't close them down. How might they help you? What advice could they give you? What ways do they think you should learn? How might you go about connecting with people in the business elsewhere? Keep them open questions. Also listening, really demonstrate that you're listening to their answers. Demonstrate that you've got respect for those answers. And you can do that, for example, by repeating back that you've understood. So you might say, oh, I see what you're saying. You're suggesting, I think, if I got involved with that project over there, that would give me exposure to the issue of payment flows in Japan. And I would learn from that. And that would be really useful in my development. And just by repeating it back demonstrates that you're listening. There are many other ways to do that, but really think about showing that you're listening, that you respect their opinions. Another final way perhaps is contracting. In other words, being clear on how much time you want from people or how much time you're offering people. So when you go up to someone and say, do you just have 5 minutes? Make sure you mean that it is 5 minutes. That is what you're asking for. And if the conversation has gone on longer than you expected, or you've gone for coffee and it's gone on longer, then take note of that, call it out. Say, oh, I've just noticed, actually, we've gone longer than I expected. Are you okay to carry on? So engage with people, ask them creative questions, learn about what's interesting to them, and that will help to build those connections for the future. So I hope these tips and ideas about building networks and relationships are really helpful. I think the really important part is this idea of collaborative leadership. That's why you're doing it. It's to enable your leadership, it's to enable the success of the organization that you work in or will work in the future. All of those things are the way to position this. And if you're finding this all still a bit daunting, then one place to go is to look for other people who seem to be good at networking, that seem to have a good set of relationships around the business. Go and ask for their advice on networking. Right? Ask for their advice on this very topic. They're a role model. They can suggest how they do it. They can show you, they can introduce you. Ultimately, all of this needs to be thought of as a behavioral experiment. As we talk about in coaching on the go, it's about practicing, finding what works for you. finding ways that you enjoy and you are learning from and that you gradually develop. So if you go to big events and it gives you a thrill, then go to big events. And if that works, keep doing it. If you're more introverted and find that tough, then find another way to do it, or recognize that you will need to give yourself some downtime afterwards to recover from all the energy you've used when having to go to that bigger event. Ultimately, experiments, building, growing, connecting. I wish you luck.
As Phil's just been saying, your network won't build itself. It's time for you to take some action. Stop now and take a piece of paper or open a new page on your device and reflect and think about at least 5 things that you can do as a result of listening to this video. What actions will you now take? And make a commitment to start your new experiments and build that network. We'd love you to jump on LinkedIn, join our group called Coaching on the Go, and let us know how you get on. Thanks so much for joining us.